DC's secret Marvel advisor, Batman's teacher breaks the multiverse. Like, share and subscribe. Episode 21, The Dilemma of Little Spider. As Peter sprinted through the city, his spider sense suddenly tingled. However, amidst his jumbled thoughts, he couldn't react in time. A sleek red and gold mech armor swiftly closed in on him, clasping his waist, and accelerated forward, carrying him a distance before unceremoniously tossing him to the ground. Peter hit the ground in an undignified sprawl. The red and gold mech armor hovered in midair while Spider-Man struggled to regain his composure. He removed his mask, and from the mechanical contraption across from him came a voice, "Well, that guy was right. You really are just a high school kid." Furious, Peter pounded the ground and retorted, "I'm not just a kid, I'm Spider-Man." Stark on the other side emitted a disdainful snort. "Spider-Man? Yes, your reputation among the gamblers in Hell's Kitchen is quite impressive. Your only claim to fame is helping those folks win a lot of money." Peter's rage threatened to consume him. This stranger in a mechanized suit had attacked him right away, taunting him. Peter lunged, but Iron Man's mech armor gracefully evaded his attack. Little Spider had no combat skills at this point, no experience fighting against machines, and no understanding of tactical calculations. He was helpless against the Mark V suit equipped with Jarvis. Spider-Man roared, "You damned machine. I'll make you see what I'm capable of." Iron Man's mech armor landed, and he remarked, "Oh, really? Show me how you defeated those low-tier fighters in the underground fighting scene." Stark's mouth remained acerbic, and Peter's face alternated between red and blue with each taunt. Eventually, Stark seemed uninterested in continuing the conversation with this young troublemaker and said coldly, "You're still wet behind the ears. Hurry back home. New York isn't your playground. Just because you have a few quirks doesn't mean you can roam the skies in this city. Someone has their eyes on you." Stark had no fondness for the current Spider-Man, especially upon learning about his extraordinary abilities being wasted in underground fighting. To him, it seemed like an utterly foolish endeavor. Stark had his own pride, and although he was arrogant and stubborn, surviving a kidnapping crisis had awakened the true Iron Man within him. Therefore, he looked down on Peter, who seemed content with causing trouble. Peter stood up and angrily tossed his mask to the ground. He retorted, "You say I'm running amok in New York, but aren't you doing the same?" His rationality returned somewhat, and he continued, "Yes, I see you in this mech armor. It's clear it's not some cheap piece. You have the money to play around like this. But what about me? My uncle and aunt are in poor health, they can't even afford medical checkups. I need money. So why can't I go to the ring to earn it? I'm not using my abilities to hurt anyone." Stark crossed his arms and said, "Have you ever considered that by having these abilities and not using them to help others, you're actually causing harm to others?" Peter gave a bewildered expression, shaking his head in disbelief at Stark's absurd words. He argued, "I gained these abilities for myself. I should be able to use them for my benefit. Why should I be obligated to help others?" At this point, Peter had not experienced the weight of Uncle Ben's death and did not understand the meaning of "with great power comes great responsibility." He firmly believed that since he possessed these abilities, he should use them to improve his own life. His perspective wasn't entirely wrong, people do live for themselves. However, Spider-Man's path was inevitably one of a superhero. As Peter matured, his innate goodness and resilience would gradually be awakened, and he would become a true superhero. Stark, despite his arrogance, had always felt a sense of duty toward the world, believing that protecting ordinary people and the Earth was inherently his responsibility as a genius. Sensing Peter's emotional turmoil, Stark said, "I know you have many unanswered questions right now. I once did too. But some things you have to experience firsthand to understand. It's not something I can explain with reason alone. I can only tell you that if you continue with this mindset, one day you'll regret it." With that, Stark's mech armor took off, leaving Peter alone, despondent and lost. Peter couldn't comprehend why everyone was against him, as if he were inherently a troublemaker. He didn't understand why, after gaining superpowers, he seemed to be even more miserable than before. He earned money, but couldn't give it directly to his aunt and uncle. His nighttime escapades affected his sleep and resulted in declining academic performance. He had also neglected Gwen's feelings, leading to a rift in their relationship. He wanted to confront his nemesis, Thompson, but couldn't afford to engage in fights at school, so he had to swallow his pride. These darn superpowers hadn't brought him significant benefits. They hadn't allowed him to suddenly turn his life around and live the luxurious life he desired. He couldn't fathom where the problem lay. Sitting atop a Hell's Kitchen building on a chilly New York night, Spider-Man pondered continuously. Suddenly, his keen hearing picked up whispers from a nearby alley behind the building. It was the back entrance of a nightclub where originally, two tall, muscular bouncers stood guard. From his vantage point, Peter could see them, but they couldn't see him. Peter spotted a bald man in a jacket who appeared to be talking to his underlings. Peter's vision and hearing far surpassed those of an average person. He noticed a circular mark resembling a target on the bald man's forehead, and he heard the bald man speak. As long as we hit the accelerator to the max before he realizes it, there's a good car over at Andre's place. He modified it, and it's much faster than a regular car. As long as we stay still at the beginning, so he doesn't hear us, and the moment he turns the corner, bam, he's done for. One of his underlings chimed in, I know a street corner at the end of Mary Street that's perfect. There's a pile of construction debris at the intersection, and the smell of gasoline can easily mask it. The bald man wore an evil grin as he said, we need to take him out before that woman does. That way, Kingpin will know who his most loyal henchman is. Peter listened to their conversation with half an ear, feeling a strong urge to rebel. What did this have to do with him anyway? It was just a struggle between gangs, one gang member wanting to kill another gang member. Why should he get involved? After all, this damned Hell's Kitchen had no good people. With these thoughts in mind, Peter slowly retreated. It was already late at night, and he had told his uncle that he wouldn't be coming home tonight. So, he returned to Daredevil's small hideout, where Daredevil was still fast asleep. Peter thought, maybe he had been wrong earlier. Hell's Kitchen did have one good person, the friend in front of him, and perhaps he had taken it a bit too far. Peter looked at the wound on his friend's shin, still oozing blood. His own bruises from the encounter with Iron Man had already healed completely. Peter suddenly felt a bit absurd. Daredevil was just an ordinary person, lacking his self-healing abilities. So, he interfered too much, making a mess of his own life. He wanted to learn Daredevil's martial arts, but he didn't want to learn his way of handling things. When he heard the gang's conversation earlier, if he had rushed down in anger to uphold justice and told them not to commit murder, he wouldn't have had a peaceful night. There were at least a dozen bodyguards in the nightclub, and he would have had to take them all down one by one. The bald man might have been particularly tough, and with so many people, he might have accidentally taken a hit, which would have hurt for a while. And the result would probably just be preventing a gang shootout. But what good would that do? There were no innocent people in Hell's Kitchen. Those caught in the shootout would only be members of other gangs. Why should he spend the whole night getting involved in such business, risking injury? With these thoughts in mind, Peter slowly sank into his dreams. In the dream, he used his abilities to make a fortune, buying a house on the most prosperous street in Queens. His uncle and aunt moved into the new big house, and they even hired a private doctor. His uncle's illness was cured, and his aunt seemed to have become 10 years younger. They lived a very wealthy and happy life as a family. The first half of this dream was indeed very beautiful, but perhaps it was because Peter had heard Daredevil's painful moans at night that the second half of the dream took a sharp turn. When Peter left, a group of thugs broke into his beautiful big house, killed his uncle and aunt, and looted everything. The neighbors saw the thugs, but didn't report them. When the police arrived, they couldn't immediately capture the culprits. Peter became a wandering soul, roaming the city every day, trying to find the culprits who had shattered his idyllic life, but there were no clues. In the end, in his dream, Daredevil appeared, and Peter confronted him, asking why he had let those few thugs slip through when he had fought so many criminals. Daredevil coldly replied, "The only one who can bear full responsibility for this is probably you." Peter woke up drenched in cold sweat. The New York sky had just brightened, and the cold air seeped through the cracks in the window, chilling his lungs and making him feel like crying. Daredevil also woke up, and Peter poured him some water. Daredevil said, "Thanks, but I might have to trouble you later to go to the clinic at the end of Mary Street and get some medicine for me." Episode 22, Hero Among Mortals, 1. Although Peter had promised to fetch the medicine shortly, it wasn't until the afternoon that he made his way to the clinic. This delay was due to Matt's leg still oozing blood, which forced Peter to try several different bandaging methods. By the time he finished tending to Matt's wounds, it was already well into the afternoon. Peter hadn't had a chance to eat, and his hunger gnawed at him as he entered the clinic. A tantalizing aroma wafted through the air. Schiller heard the doorbell and stepped out to find a young man in a hoodie standing at the door, vigorously inhaling as if he wanted to absorb the scent into his belly. Schiller wiped his hands and said, "Come in." Peter scratched his head and said, "Good afternoon, sir." A friend of mine told me to come here to pick up some medicine. He said you'd know. Oh, I know, Schiller replied. But you'll have to wait until I've finished my meal. He shouldn't be in too much of a hurry, right? Peter said, it's fine. His bleeding has stopped, but he's in quite a bit of pain. He needs some painkillers. Have you eaten? Schiller asked. Peter blushed slightly, feeling that his gaze towards the kitchen might have been too intense and had been noticed by the doctor. Schiller said, if not, stay and have a meal. You can take some back for Matt as well. With that, a small yellow creature appeared with a large bowl and eagerly sniffed the air, licking its lips as if it couldn't wait any longer. Schiller prepared a Chinese meal, including rice, sweet and sour spare ribs, spicy shredded potatoes, and a bowl of tomato egg soup. Peter, who was becoming quite famished, stared at the table without finding words to refuse. Ever since he acquired his spider abilities, his appetite had grown, and he was easily susceptible to hunger. After devouring an entire rice cooker full of rice, Peter began to feel embarrassed. He put down his bowl, his ears turning red, and said, I'm really sorry, doctor. It seems I've eaten all your food. I'll pay for it. No need, Schiller interrupted. I was planning to make another pot of rice anyway, and I have to take some back to my old friend. There are still some spare ribs in the pot. Scoop them out and put them in that lunchbox in the cupboard. You can take them for Matt. The little spider scurried into the kitchen, not only making a fresh pot of rice, but also washing the dishes. Schiller thought this version of Spider-Man was quite likable. In contrast, Pikachu had eaten until he was stuffed, and after finishing, he flopped onto a chair and began to snore. Schiller grabbed his thunderbolt-shaped tail and shook it, saying, even if someone else is responsible for washing dishes today, it's not a reason for you to shirk your duty. Go take out the trash. Oh, sir, I can take it out on my way, Peter said. All right, thank you. Oh, by the way, there's no garbage disposal fee in Hell's Kitchen. Just walk ahead, there's a corner with a pile of waste. You can throw the trash there. Peter carried 2 large bags of kitchen waste and went out through the back door of the clinic. He quickly spotted the place Schiller mentioned, which was a bit of a distance from the clinic. It was piled high with broken bricks, scrap wood, and other garbage that emitted a strong, unpleasant odor. Several homeless people were nearby, pointing at leftovers or discarded kitchen waste to fill their stomachs. As Spider-Man walked past them, the homeless people were on the other side of the waste pile and didn't notice him. Perhaps they had already eaten their fill, or perhaps Schiller's Chinese cuisine was just to their liking. Peter's earlier feelings of depression dissipated, and he joyfully carried the 2 bags of trash. With a short sprint and a powerful swing of his arm, he tossed the trash onto the top of the waste pile. Bingo! Peter shouted. He loved doing this with his Uncle Ben when they used to take out the trash, standing far away and flinging the garbage bag, hoping it would land perfectly in the trash can. But he hadn't had this much strength before. Often, it was Uncle Ben who had to clean up the mess. Peter thought that next time he went to take out the trash, he would show his uncle his newfound arm strength. He tossed the garbage bags up, and one of them burst open, spilling leftover bones from someone's meal, the leftover bits of meat from Schiller's cooking, some uneaten shredded potatoes, and half a sprouted potato. The homeless people saw this like they had stumbled upon a feast of gourmet delicacies. They rushed to grab whatever they could. The waste pile had grown into a small hill, and the homeless people had to climb it, stepping on broken bricks and wooden boards. At the top of the pile, several large pieces of shattered wall formed a triangle. The homeless people struggled to climb up, and that's when Peter finally noticed someone scavenging. Feeling a bit embarrassed, he dashed halfway up the waste pile to retrieve the garbage. These homeless people weren't mutation-powered Spider-Men, they were already starving, weak, and lacking in strength. An elderly woman, who had been the closest to the top, lost her grip and dropped the piece of waste she had been trying to grab. She fell backward. Just as Spider-Man reached the top of the waste pile, he saw a homeless person fall. He reached out to grab them but was a fraction too late. This waste pile contained all sorts of hazardous items, broken bottles thrown down by drunks from the floors above, steel rods, upright spiked wooden boards. Regardless of what she hit, it would likely take a considerable toll. Luckily, Peter had superhuman abilities. He swiftly bent down and caught the falling homeless person. But before he could even feel a sense of relief, he heard a loud, thunderous roar, followed by a screeching brake sound, and a dull thud as something collided. Blood splattered, and Peter turned his head in disbelief towards the nearest intersection. The figure that had been flung was all too familiar. It was Daredevil. A vast pool of fresh blood flowed from the spot where he had fallen, the heavy scent of iron and gore enveloping Peter's vision in a crimson haze. He rushed forward, his actions akin to madness, finding Matt lying there, blood seeping from his eyes, nose, and mouth, his spine twisted into a grotesque shape, seemingly broken beyond repair. Yet, Matt was not dead, only rendered immobile after losing the connection between his brain and nerves. Peter trembled uncontrollably, sparing no time for contemplation as he hastily picked up Matt and rushed into the Schiller Clinic's rear entrance, shouting, "Doctor! Doctor! We need treatment here." A glance from Schiller at Matt was enough to deduce that he had likely been ambushed by those who sought his life. Schiller instructed, "The garage is right nearby. Place him in the car and rush him to Presbyterian Hospital." For injuries this severe, only the best hospital held a sliver of hope for a possible rescue. Schiller raced through the streets of Manhattan, determined to reach Presbyterian Hospital at the earliest. Here, he had some influence, and Matt was swiftly ushered into the emergency room. However, the attending doctor soon approached them with a grave expression. "The chances of saving this gentleman are slim. Unfortunately, he is no longer able to write a will or leave verbal instructions. If you are his family, you might want to see him one last time." Peter was on the brink of collapse. Everything seemed to converge on him, the realization hitting hard. The very day the gang sought to murder someone, it turned out to be the only good person in all of Hell's Kitchen, Daredevil Matt. He couldn't accept that all of this had transpired because of him. If he had killed those gang members when he first heard about their intentions, or even if he had just informed Matt of the danger, he might have been more cautious. If he hadn't stayed at the clinic to eat, if he had left immediately after getting his medication, Matt might not have come looking for him. If he hadn't played around and thrown those 2 garbage bags so high, perhaps he could have intercepted Matt as the car sped away. He had so many opportunities to save his friend, but he had failed at every turn. Daredevil was on the brink of death, a reality Peter could hardly bear. Schiller, on the other hand, remained composed. He asked the specialist, "What is the primary issue? Cardiopulmonary function? Neurosurgery? Or internal injuries?" The doctor shook his head. "None of the above. It's his spine. The nerves are likely beyond repair. Even if we barely manage to save his life, he'll be paralyzed for the rest of it." Schiller took a deep breath. "I just need to know if there's any way to save him." The doctor hesitated for a moment before responding, "Perhaps Dr. Strange can help. He's our best neurosurgeon, and he might be the only one capable of reconnecting those many nerves." Schiller swiftly turned and said, "Peter, I'm going to find someone who can save Matt. But you must stay here. Matt has been taken to the hospital, but those who wanted him dead won't give up easily. After I leave, you must ensure that no one enters the operating room. I'll be back as soon as possible." With that, he left. Peter trembled all over, continuously muttering to himself, "No one will enter the operating room, no one will enter the operating room. I won't let anyone in." After Schiller left the hospital, he immediately called Pepper and said, "I need the home address of a doctor named Strange." Pepper didn't inquire about the reason. Soon, Schiller received a string of addresses on his mobile phone. The location was not far from the Elder Council's hospital, in one of the most upscale apartments nearby. Schiller activated his blink, arriving at the apartment building with lightning speed. He didn't bother with the elevator or knocking on the door. Instead, he used several consecutive blinks to appear right behind Strange, who was sipping his afternoon tea. Startled by the sudden movement, Strange turned to find a cane pressed firmly against his throat. "Listen, I don't have time for small talk. My friend is critically injured and is currently undergoing treatment at Presbyterian Hospital. You're the best neurosurgeon there, so grab your things and get ready for surgery." Strange wore an absurd expression, and Schiller released his grip on the cane, but it remained suspended in midair, pointing directly at Strange's throat. Schiller extended his hand towards the air, and Strange's coat, hanging on a hanger, flew over. Wide-eyed and incredulous, Strange watched as Schiller tossed the coat to him and said, "I believe you understand that you have no right to refuse. Come with me immediately." Episode 23, Heroes Are Mortals, 2. Strange swallowed hard, looking deep into Schiller's gray eyes. He genuinely lacked the courage to refuse, as anyone with common sense could tell that Schiller was far from ordinary. Although Strange was pulled into the car, he insisted, "You need to understand, I'm a doctor, not a god. If your friend is already dead, no matter how you threaten me, I can't resurrect him." Driving with a blank expression, Schiller responded, "We're both doctors. I know this better than you. I came to you because I'm certain you can save him." Strange let out a sigh of relief, but retorted, furrowing his brows, "You're just a psychologist. It's best if you don't hastily conclude about neurosurgery." Before he could finish his words, a ballpoint pen was again pointed at his forehead, hovering in midair while Schiller's hands were on the wheel. Taking the hint, Strange mimed zipping his mouth shut, signifying his intent to remain silent. Elsewhere, the young Spider-Man stood guilt-ridden outside the operating room, determined not to let even a fly inside. Yet, Matt's ex-girlfriend, Erica, managed to sneak up to the operating room's entrance. Erica wasn't there to kill Matt. On the contrary, she had known about the attacker's plan even before Peter. She had been looking for a chance to warn Matt, but he left in haste, and she only arrived after the incident. Her relationship with Matt was complex. They were former classmates and lovers, separated by irreconcilable differences. Despite being hired by Kingpin to assassinate Matt, she never intended to harm him. However, in a lapse of attention, Matt fell victim to another assailant, making her incredibly anxious. Coming from a privileged background, Erica was worldly. She recognized the severity of Matt's injuries. She believed that only some mystic force, perhaps the beast's power, might save him. Using a ninja stealth technique, Erica approached the operating room. She barely acknowledged Peter, the boy who appeared no older than a high school student. After observing him for days, she dismissed him as an unskilled teenager and planned to bypass him. Unfortunately for her, Peter's spider sense, especially heightened during his anxious state, sensed her approach. As she drew near, Peter's head whipped towards where he felt her presence, and he took a swing at her. Aware of Peter's superhuman strength, Erica didn't dare block his attack directly. However, Peter's untrained move was full of openings. Capitalizing on his imbalance, Erica grabbed his wrist and yanked, causing him to stumble forward. With a quick trip, she had him on the ground. Yet, perhaps his heightened adrenaline amplified Peter's powers, allowing him to spring up and grip Erica from behind. Both were fueled by desperation and anger. But Erica, trained by the hand, reacted swiftly. The moment Peter grabbed her, she brandished a knife and slashed him deeply from his shoulder down to his lower rib, nearly splitting him in half. Overwhelmed by searing pain, Peter's every latent ability seemed to activate. With a surge of strength, he hurled Erica across the corridor, incapacitating her for a while. Collapsing, Peter was overwhelmed with pain. The knife not only sliced through his back, but also pierced his lung. Each breath he took filled his throat with blood. This was an unprecedented pain for Peter, who, until this incident, only knew the pain of a mere beating. Now, with his back almost pierced and a lung injured, each breath was a torment. Tears welled up involuntarily as he realized that even heroes bleed and feel pain. His healing abilities provided some relief, and through blurred vision, he glimpsed the incapacitated Daredevil inside the operating room. Daredevil, though awake, was paralyzed. Without the healing abilities Peter possessed, he was on the brink of death. Guilt and self-blame consumed Peter. A regular man, with no superpowers, had risked his life for him, but when Peter overheard the criminal's plot, he selfishly left, resulting in dire consequences for his heroic friend, Daredevil. Suddenly, everything became intensified for Peter. His spider sense was buzzing, and the world took on a different hue. Although Erica had vanished using her stealth technique, Peter's red-rimmed eyes locked onto her exact location. In a split second, the previously clumsy boy was gone, replaced by a force that slammed Erica into a wall. Gasping and bleeding, she invoked her stealth technique to escape. When Schiller returned to the hospital, he found Peter seated against a nearly shattered wall, eyes bloodshot. Strange entered the operating room as night fell completely. Schiller faced Spider-Man and remarked, "Peter. I never imagined our meeting would be under such circumstances." Peter, still reeling, didn't catch Schiller's implication. Schiller elaborated, squatting to Peter's level, "I apologize for not being there for your checkup. As you can see, I no longer work at this hospital." Peter's memories jogged, recalling the doctor he'd chatted with online. "It's you," he whispered, "the doctor." Schiller nodded. "Yes, it's me." Peter looked down, guilt evident. "I must have disappointed you. I'm not as good as I seemed during our chats. I did a lot of wrong things and almost killed my friends." Schiller said, "I believe you've come to understand some things." Yes, Peter replied hoarsely, "I understand the biggest reason is that getting hurt really hurts." "It does hurt, but he still chooses to do it," Peter continued in a hushed tone, "he's a hero, and I'm not. Maybe I'll never become one." Schiller's voice remained calm, devoid of any hint of blame. He simply said, "Perhaps you've come to realize that in this world, if capable individuals don't step up to save others, there won't be anyone to save you either. Maybe you think life isn't good right now, but even in this kind of life, it's built by people willing to sacrifice for you. Even lives as destitute as those of beggars, Daredevil cleans up the streets before they can have them. Peter, perhaps I shouldn't be the one to say this, but it seems I'm the only one who can do it now, Schiller remarked. With great power comes great responsibility. Spider-Man fell silent, closing his eyes. In the early hours of the morning, at its darkest, Strange removed his gloves and stepped out of the operating room. He said, "Congratulations, the surgery was a success. There's an 80% chance his nerves will fully recover." Upon hearing these words, Peter finally let out a roar, as if he wanted to release all the pent-up emotions in his chest. He jumped out of the window, scaled the building's walls, and swiftly made his way to the rooftop, where he began leaping across the rooftops of New York City. At that moment, he saw the golden-red mech armor, as if it were leading him somewhere, constantly circling around him. Peter followed the mech armor, and they leaped and sprinted all the way to the top of the New York City television tower. Both of them stood at the pinnacle of the New York City television tower. Peter desperately wanted to shout, but he couldn't make a sound. All his emotions were bottled up inside him, and he felt like he was going crazy. Stark's face mask lifted, and Peter saw his face, saying with some surprise, "You're Stark. Iron Man is Stark." "It's not that surprising, child. Besides the owner of Stark Industries, who else could develop such mech armor?" Stark replied. "But the news said you were kidnapped and taken to Afghanistan." "Yes, but do you want to know how I escaped?" Peter looked at him, and Stark continued, "I created an energy core and implanted it here." Stark pointed to his chest. "There's still an arc reactor here. In a cave in Afghanistan, I cut open my own chest and shoved a piece of metal inside. My own blood soaked my pants." Just imagining that scene made Peter feel a dull pain in his chest. He asked, "That must have been incredibly painful, right?" "Of course, it was excruciating," Stark said, trying to sound nonchalant, but Peter could hear a hint of trembling in his tone, as if he didn't want to recall that day. "You have to open your chest with a not-so-sharp bone knife and sew wires into your flesh." Peter shivered at the thought. He had never imagined that Stark, who always appeared in the news as a playboy, the seemingly privileged billionaire, had such a painful past. He had shed a lot of blood and endured pains that were nearly unbearable for an ordinary person. "Although I like to call myself a genius, I am very aware that if a bullet hits me, I will bleed a lot. If shrapnel shreds my heart, I will die. If I lose a leg, I won't be able to walk either. But I've done a lot, and there are risks involved." "Am I seeking thrills?" Stark asked. "I'm the richest person in the world, and I have the power that the vast majority of people on this planet don't have. I have absolutely no need to wear my expensive mech armor and save ordinary people who can't even afford a single screw from me, let alone take on such great risks." Spider-Man closed his eyes and fell silent for a moment before he said, "With great power comes great responsibility, right?" Stark didn't answer, he simply pointed to his heart. And Peter understood his meaning. He felt that his heart had already given him the answer. Facing the dawn of New York City, Peter and Stark stood at the top of the television tower, watching as a golden light broke through the clouds, casting a radiant glow over all the buildings in New York. From this day forward, Peter Parker, Spider-Man, understood one thing. Heroes are just ordinary people. They feel pain, get hurt, bleed, feel lonely, and lost, just like everyone else. The only thing that sets them apart from ordinary people on the ground is their sense of responsibility, and an unwavering determination to uphold justice, even unto death. No one is born with the ability to withstand such intense pain. As they move forward in the darkness, they forge the painful experiences into a sturdy armor for their bodies. And when the day breaks, they use this armor to save the world. Spider-Man stood up from the iron scaffolding of the television tower for the first time, not yet wearing his Spider-Man suit, not yet as tall and strong, but his soul stood tall and proud. The surging emotions within him turned into a source of strength that spread throughout his body. Facing the first rays of sunlight, he thought, "It's a new day. It was time to save the world." Episode 24, The God of Profanity. Although Matt had been rescued, he was still in a critical condition, receiving constant monitoring in the intensive care unit. Schiller turned to Strange and said, "Dr. Strange, I owe you a favor. If you ever need assistance in the future, don't hesitate to find me." Strange's expression wasn't great. After all, he had been abducted and subjected to nearly 10 hours of surgery since the afternoon. He impatiently replied, "God help me, I hope I never see you again, Schiller." Schiller remarked, "I believe you've already witnessed my abilities. As a piece of advice, be careful when driving." Strange retorted, "Don't play these strange tricks with me, I want to go back to sleep." With that, he left, and Schiller shrugged. He knew he couldn't change Dr. Strange's fate at this moment. However, when the time came for him to seek help for his injured arm, he would surely remember Schiller. After a good night's sleep back at the clinic, Schiller woke up to find that he had 2 more opportunities for random chats. This meant he had significantly influenced 2 important characters in different storylines, Daredevil, Matt, and Spider-Man. Schiller decided to use one of the opportunities now. He realized that his abilities needed further enhancement, especially his defense and evasion skills. Having witnessed Daredevil Matt's recent accident, he felt that his reflexes were still not strong enough. Even though he could blink in a fraction of a second, there was no guarantee that he could react in time. Depending solely on the sometimes unreliable spider sense wouldn't suffice. So, Schiller opened the chat system and initiated a random conversation. Soon enough, his chat partner appeared, but to his surprise, the avatar this time was peculiar. The profile picture was entirely black, with only 2 glowing eyes in the frame. As soon as the communication connected, Schiller heard a string of incomprehensible language from the other side. All his previous chat partners had spoken English, even when communicating directly through brainwaves with the Ancient One. Their messages had been easy to understand. However, this time, Schiller encountered a chat partner who seemed to be speaking in a language he couldn't comprehend. He tapped the system and asked, "Can't the chat system translate this? What language is the other side speaking?" Due to Schiller's past experiences visiting various universities and engaging in exchanges, he had some knowledge of languages from European countries, in addition to English and Chinese. But the language spoken by the other party was unlike any he had ever heard. The system provided a response. The chat system automatically translates any language spoken by the chat partner. If there are still parts you can't understand, it means there is a fundamental difference in life form between the host and the other party, or the other party's language requires specialized brain organs to comprehend. Schiller understood now. The other party was likely not human. The string of incomprehensible sounds they were emitting might require specific brain organs that Schiller, as a human, did not possess. Therefore, he couldn't understand what they were saying. Schiller clicked on the avatar, and there were a few words written clearly on it: God of the Symbiotes, Null. He hadn't expected that this random connection would lead to Null. The God of the Symbiotes had been extensively described in Venom-related comics. In brief, he was an ancient being that existed since the birth of the universe, the Lord of the Abyss. He had forged a weapon called the All-Black, with which he beheaded a celestial deity and subsequently wreaked havoc among various civilizations in the universe. He had discovered a method to create dark beings by splitting symbiotes. With his army of symbiotes and a legion of monstrous dragons, he had terrorized the universe. One day, he had ordered his symbiote army to attack Earth, only to be struck down by a lightning bolt from the Asgardian deity Thor. This severed his connection to most of the symbiotes he had created. Many symbiotes scattered across space, bonding with various life forms, including some benevolent and rational aliens. This rebellion made the symbiotes realize the malevolent nature of their creator and his destructive actions. They imprisoned Null, the god of the symbiotes, on a remote and desolate planet, known as the symbiote homeworld. Schiller didn't rush to use his next chat opportunity. Instead, he eagerly began to decipher what Null was saying. Since their initial connection, Null had been delivering long, incomprehensible rants. However, there seemed to be some consistency in the way Null communicated, even though Schiller couldn't understand the content. After repeated efforts, Schiller finally grasped the essence of what Null was trying to convey. He was hurling insults. Indeed, although not everyone in the universe spoke English, the tone and high-frequency usage of certain offensive words were consistent when beings from all corners of the universe engaged in profanity. Null was no exception. Schiller, after hearing Null's angry tone and the recurring syllable Nataru, deduced that it must be a profanity in the symbiote race's language, similar to words starting with F. So, when Null went on another tirade, Schiller casually responded with, "Nataru." There was an eerie silence from the other side. For the first time in years of hurling insults, Null received an insult in return. Schiller's guess was accurate. The word Nataru was indeed profanity in the symbiote language. Null responded with even angrier language, but Schiller continued to reply with just, "Nataru." After listening for a while, Schiller even learned a few more profane words and mastered the pronunciation and articulation perfectly. As they continued their profanity-laden exchange, Schiller reflected on the ancient being's origin story. Null had been quite unfortunate, regardless of whether he was good or bad. He had been abandoned by his own creation, and after their rebellion, they imprisoned him. Now, it seemed that he had been trapped for a very long time. Schiller couldn't help but understand Null's frustration. If he were in Null's shoes, he would probably hurl insults too. Schiller embarked on his research into the power to replicate the god of symbiotes, but he hesitated somewhat. He speculated that the god of symbiotes possessed the ability to create symbiotes, a power he did not desire. When he clicked on the icon, he noticed that the 4 words representing the replication ability turned red, accompanied by parentheses that read, "The opponent's ability is currently undergoing mutation, please copy with caution." This was the first time Schiller had encountered such an occurrence. To understand it fully, one must delve into the origin story of the god of symbiotes. Even in captivity, the god of symbiotes was not idle. He had been concocting escape plans, and Schiller's arrival coincided with one of them. Shortly after the god of symbiotes devised this method, Schiller made contact with him. The god of symbiotes was an ancient being, and though it couldn't be confirmed whether he was the first inhabitant of the 7th space, he was certainly among the earliest. His strength derived mostly from his innate gifts, his intellect was not his strong suit. His escape plans weren't the result of wisdom, but rather an exploitation of his unique nature. In his previous life, Schiller hadn't delved deeply into comics that covered this aspect, but he knew that the abilities of the god of symbiotes' offspring varied greatly, with some being immensely powerful while others were quite weak. Furthermore, some of these symbiote descendants possessed unique abilities. The god of symbiotes intended to leverage this characteristic, planning to create a special symbiote. He wanted this offspring to lack a physical form, instead transforming into a conscious mist resembling cigarette smoke. By transferring his consciousness into this offspring, he aimed to break free from the planet's captivity. To be honest, this wasn't a particularly brilliant plan, and there was no guarantee it would succeed in enabling his escape. However, the god of symbiotes was stranded on a desolate planet, with nothing but time to kill. His daily routine consisted of only 2 activities, cursing and creating offspring. Just as he was about to create this new offspring and transfer his consciousness, Schiller made contact with him. Hence, the god of symbiotes' abilities were in the midst of mutation. He was transferring his consciousness into the new body, and his powers were also transforming into those of the new form. Typically, when dealing with a connection object like the god of symbiotes, it was nearly impossible for Schiller to replicate his abilities, akin to trying to catch an unharmed spider. The god of symbiotes had originally fought battles in the universe, relying on the powerful living abyss Black Death Sword. Later, his ability to spawn dark creatures stemmed from his innate nature, emerging suddenly after his defeat and downfall, without any specific source. These were aspects Schiller couldn't replicate, and even if he could, he had no intention of doing so. Why would he want to slice himself into pieces? Moreover, these fragments might even unite and betray him, making it a highly unreliable choice. So, without hesitation, Schiller chose to replicate the ability that was currently undergoing mutation. If this ability involved invisibility or damage avoidance, he could potentially gain a substantial advantage. Even if it turned out to be something akin to venom, offering considerable strength or a combat suit-like transformation, it would still be a valuable acquisition. Symbiote Grey Mist, special ability, loaded, the system announced. In an instant, Schiller felt as though he had gained another perspective. He was still using his own eyes, but the entity using them was not himself. The signals received through his eyes were still transmitted to his brain. It was as if he had directly copied a symbiote. No, it was slightly different. The system's ability to copy didn't provide Schiller with any external items, nor could it replicate the opponent's equipment or other physical objects. For example, if Schiller were to copy Iron Man's abilities, he might obtain Stark's genius intellect or his ability to develop equipment, but he wouldn't acquire a finished product like the Mark V mech armor. The system could only replicate the abilities of the conversation partner themselves, without duplicating anything external to their bodies. Schiller sensed the presence of a nascent soul, tucked within him. However, it wasn't an external entity, it was still him. Unlike venom, this symbiote couldn't detach from its host at will, it became an integral part of Schiller. In simple terms, it became a capability that the system installed in Schiller, akin to the other abilities he had acquired from the system. It couldn't separate from Schiller. If Schiller died, it would cease to exist. There wouldn't be another host. Yet, it possessed certain symbiote characteristics. For instance, it could think. Schiller felt that a region of his brain had been altered, and the symbiote became an organ of his brain. Their communication resembled a dialogue between 2 personalities. This particular symbiote was truly unique. In the days to come, Schiller would discover that when the god of symbiotes created it, he had harbored even grander ambitions. After the system copied it, further modifications were made to the symbiote to seamlessly integrate its features with the system's capabilities. This resulted in a life form that was perhaps unparalleled throughout the entire cosmos, an immensely potent life form. Episode 25, The Symbiote of Alcohol Monger. Symbiote's learning speed was astonishingly fast. Schiller had just copied this ability a short afternoon ago, and now another voice inside his mind could communicate with him clearly through brainwaves. Although it could only express simple emotions at the moment, this was already quite remarkable. After being able to communicate with this symbiote, Schiller intended to test its abilities. He had thought this symbiote was similar to Venom in the movies, and all he needed to do was shout, "Mask," as in the film, and a sticky, gooey substance would wrap around him, complete with 2 large white eyes, sharp teeth, and a long tongue. Symbiote could directly sense the images Schiller imagined. It sent a series of denial brainwaves, and kept repeating a phrase in Schiller's mind, "I won't be gooey, I won't be gooey, I won't be gooey." It seemed to be because it sensed that Schiller didn't really like the sticky feeling of symbiote. To be honest, Schiller didn't want to harm this newly born little fellow. After all, it would be his capable assistant in the future. It wasn't that Schiller disliked the sticky texture of symbiote, but rather found it quite unbearable. No matter how powerful symbiote was, that sensation like a pile of rotten mud was truly unsettling. Seemingly eager to prove that it wasn't gooey, gray mist, who had just learned to communicate and interact, took control of Schiller's body before he could react. In an instant, Schiller found that the world in his eyes had changed. He had lost his eyes, or rather, his entire solid body, and gained thousands of sensors. Schiller realized that he could now vividly feel every detail of everything in the clinic bedroom. These signals continuously entered his brain, but they weren't images he saw, they were sensations. His vision wasn't that good, nowhere near being able to discern every detail of the fibers in the sheets, but now he could feel them. Initially, each sensor sent a flood of information that overwhelmed his brain, but quickly, these details were processed rapidly by his other thinking organ, the symbiote, and fed back to Schiller's brain. So many details gave Schiller a sense of being in control of everything. Next, Schiller discovered that he could seemingly control the state. He began to manage the work of all the sensors, spreading them out as far as possible. Until these sensors spread across the bedroom's full-length mirror, and Schiller saw that he had turned into a gray mist. Indeed, he had lost his entire body and transformed into an elusive mist. Each factor in the mist became his sensor, and thousands of symbiote factors quickly wove into a vast information-gathering network, leaving no detail unnoticed. Anywhere these factors could go, there were no secrets for Schiller. For example, Schiller could even see the arrangement of iron elements in an electric kettle, and if he focused his attention, he could sense the distribution of oxygen and other rare gases in the air. This microscopic observation ability had reached the molecular level, and even approached the level of atoms, making the world he could observe as a human seem much grander and more fascinating. "Thank goodness you're not the kind of symbiote that's like rotten mud," Schiller thought. Gray mist seemed to feel praised and transmitted a very happy emotion. To further demonstrate its power, it took control of Schiller and dissipated into a mist. The gray mist began to disperse evenly like ordinary fog. Soon, a hazy fog enveloped Hell's Kitchen. The numerous factors became more distant, but they continued to transmit various kinds of information to Schiller's brain. With the expanded range, this information grew by the hundreds and thousands, but with the symbiote's help, Schiller could simply focus his attention on a particular part. For instance, he could feel a shootout several blocks away in the heart of Hell's Kitchen, where a gang was involved. He could even sense the trajectory of every bullet as it passed during the exchange of gunfire. Schiller focused his attention, trying to locate a bald man with a target pattern on his forehead. Gray mist locked onto him in an instant, even sending back all the microscopic element information of the environment he was in to Schiller's brain. This ability was truly powerful. Wherever there was mist, no one could escape Schiller's gaze. Schiller felt that if it were just his own brain handling so much complex information, he would likely go crazy on the spot. But this symbiote seemed to have this ability naturally from birth. In a dense fog, the information transmitted by each factor could be rapidly categorized, filtered, and concentrated by Schiller's brain in a very short process. As long as Schiller focused his attention on what he wanted to know, he would naturally gain that knowledge. He was like someone playing a simulation city game from a god's perspective, able to observe everything in the mist at any time. No detail could escape the penetration of the mist factor. Moreover, this miraculous factor could penetrate the interior of objects and cause destruction, such as disrupting stable molecular structures and turning objects into powder in an instant. Gray mist informed him that this ability was only effective on entities with stable molecular structures and could not be interfered with by any other powers, otherwise, it would fail to exert its influence. But this was already a remarkably potent ability. When transitioning back to a humanoid form, Schiller had the choice to condense his body in any area enveloped by gray mist. In other words, within the range of gray mist's coverage, he could vanish an unlimited number of times in one location and suddenly appear in another. However, it couldn't entirely replace blink, as the process of transforming into gray mist, dispersing gray mist, condensing, and then transforming back into a humanoid form required a certain amount of time, which was not as swift as blink's teleportation. Things on the Marvel side had temporarily settled down. Daredevil Matt was in the process of recovery, and the young Spider-Man wanted to follow Stark to learn how to become a superhero. Unfortunately, he had upcoming final exams, so he needed to catch up on his missed classes and didn't have much time to roam around. Stark was irritated by Nick Fury and was spending most of his time tinkering with mech armor in his laboratory, rarely leaving his premises. So, Schiller decided to take a nap and return to the DC world. Shortly after returning to DC, Schiller discovered a troublesome aspect of the symbiote within him. Back in the DC world, Schiller was organizing his equipment. Among them, there was little fear gas left due to Jonathan's arrest. Fortunately, he had nearly depleted Jonathan's stockpile before, so what remained was the concentrated and high-quality fear gas. He was in the process of diluting the remaining fear gas to load it into spray bottles for ease of use. Fear gas had no effect on Schiller whatsoever, so he didn't need to protect himself during experiments as Jonathan did. In his apartment, the only living beings were Schiller and Pikachu, both of which were immune to fear gas. Therefore, Schiller didn't worry about minor leaks of low-concentration fear gas during his experiments. This time was no different. After a series of highly unorthodox chemical dilution procedures, Schiller managed to fill various spray bottles with the diluted fear gas. However, at this moment, his brain suddenly received a series of excited signals. "This is delicious, this is delicious, this is delicious, this is delicious, feed me, feed me, feed me, feed me, let's eat, let's eat, let's eat, let's eat, let's eat." Schiller was puzzled. Was the symbiote saying that fear gas was delicious? He suddenly remembered the comic book's portrayal of symbiotes, especially Venom. Venom could eat chocolate instead of human brains because they contained a substance called phenylethylamine. This chemical could excite the human brain and was present in both the human brain and chocolate. Could fear gas contain it too? Schiller thought it was quite possible. Fear gas induced the deepest fears in people's minds and activated their negative emotions. It was hard to say whether Jonathan had used this chemical while creating this gas. Now, it seemed not only had he used it, but he had used it quite extensively. "How do you want to eat it?" Schiller asked in his mind. The symbiote didn't seem to grasp the concept and only knew that the substance in front of it was highly attractive. Schiller had no choice but to take out a bottle of undiluted liquid fear gas and sprayed it into his own nose. In an instant, he felt the symbiote within him become excited to the point of frenzy. It sent a long string of brainwaves that Schiller couldn't understand and shouted loudly in his mind using all the vocabulary it had just learned. After a while, a dense mist began to emanate from Schiller's body. It was darker and more profound than ordinary gray mist. Schiller sniffed it and thought it might be fear gas. Well, Schiller thought, it seemed that high-concentration fear gas was like strong liquor for the symbiote. It had intoxicated the gray mist. Moreover, after the symbiote got drunk, its reactions were surprisingly similar to humans. It first acted crazily, spewing nonsense, and then vomited. The mist surrounding Schiller was likely the aftermath of gray mist getting drunk. Gray mist recovered quickly, but even after regaining its composure, it still wanted Schiller to provide more liquor, a request Schiller firmly refused. However, it didn't seem to give up and continued to whimper in Schiller's mind, looking very dejected. Schiller couldn't help but feel exasperated. How had his symbiote turned into a drunkard? Episode 26, The Failed Zero-Cost Plan. In this week's class assignment, I want to commend Mr. Robert for his outstanding presentation on emotional deconstruction analysis. His arguments align very well with the theories I discussed in class. Of course, Ms. Hoff's paper had the highest word count this time, but I must emphasize that word count doesn't necessarily reflect the quality of your work. If you can present your arguments clearly within 3,000 words, I will be more than satisfied. As expected, there's still one person who didn't submit their assignment this time. Mr. Wayne, please come to my office after class. If you have no intention of completing your assignments, then I believe you won't need to sit for the final exams either. After all, without any assignment grades, you won't earn any credits for the semester. Schiller closed his textbook in front of him and said, "Class dismissed." Gotham University, situated on the east coast of the United States, was well known. It was common knowledge that most prestigious U.S. universities, including Harvard, MIT, and Princeton, were all located on the East Coast. Gotham University, however, was not a competitor to these esteemed schools. Despite being a nationally recognized public university, it was not an Ivy League institution. Moreover, Gotham City, where the university was located, had a notorious reputation for its poor safety. Few local students from the U.S. would consider applying to this university. Even those from Gotham who could attend college locally often chose to apply to nearby prestigious universities. This resulted in the students who stayed at Gotham University being either those who couldn't secure admission elsewhere or international students. Expecting exceptional academic performance from this group was challenging, but many of them managed to submit their assignments on time, likely due to Schiller's formidable reputation. However, the low ranking of Gotham University was not solely due to the students. With the backing of the Wayne family, Gotham University had the resources to attract top-tier professors and acquire cutting-edge laboratory equipment. Despite the security concerns, as long as one remained within the confines of Gotham University, it was a relatively safe place. The problem lay in the fact that the university's president was unwilling to cede too much control to the Wayne family. It wasn't out of moral superiority, rather, Gotham University was his political leverage, and he didn't want to relinquish it to the Wayne family. As a result, Gotham University remained in a semi-dormant state, which displeased Schiller. He didn't want to tarnish his impeccable record with a teaching position at a bottom-ranked school. His goal was to elevate Gotham University to Ivy League status before anything else. Since they were all Northeastern universities, Gotham University's football team performed reasonably well. Joining the Ivy League didn't seem like an unreasonable aspiration. Before that happened, Schiller had no interest in getting involved in the chaos of Gotham, including Batman and other criminals. In the afternoon, Bruce visited Schiller's office and explained, "Professor, I haven't actually failed to write my paper. I'll have my butler deliver the USB drive shortly." "Failure to bring it means failure to submit it," Schiller said sternly, cutting him off. Schiller then tapped the desk and continued, "If I let Bruce off the hook for not completing his assignment, it won't affect the others, right? After all, it's normal for Wayne family members to enjoy certain privileges. But you've donated hundreds of millions to the school, and that money didn't end up in my pocket. So, if you don't submit your assignment, I'll still deduct all your credits, and you won't receive your degree." Bruce replied quietly, "Actually, I already have my diploma. The company that prints the diplomas is owned by my family." Schiller rubbed his forehead and said, "What am I supposed to do with a damn rich second generation like you? How's your investigation going?" "Miss Christine hasn't left Gotham University. She disappeared on campus, but this isn't related to Jonathan's arrest since it happened after Jonathan was apprehended." "Do you have any suspects?" Schiller inquired. "Actually, the university president is a prime suspect." Before Schiller could question further, Bruce added, "I don't have concrete evidence to prove that he kidnapped Christine, but 3 members of the jury who acquitted Jonathan and his defense lawyer are all from a well-known gang on the east side of Gotham, the Red Crow Gang. Furthermore, the university president is friends with the leader of this gang. They attended the mayor's banquet together, and most importantly, his daughter is married to the head of the gang, who manages their smuggling operations. But what role does Christine play in this story? As far as I know, she's just an ordinary girl, albeit exceptionally beautiful. I suspect Miss Christine may have overheard something about Jonathan's conspiracy during her visit to the president's office." "Do you have any evidence?" Schiller asked. "I think I'll refrain from focusing on evidence for now. Of course, I won't rush to confront the president because that could alert him." Schiller remarked, "I suspect Miss Christine is not dead yet. You see, if the person who attacked her is indeed the principal, it's highly unlikely that he directly killed Christine. The cheerleading squad cannot replace a leader so quickly, and if the cheerleading squad falters, it will affect the results of the football game. That's the one thing Gotham University can boast about, and it's also a part of the principal's personal record." Bruce sighed and replied, "Regardless, Miss Christine is innocent. Have you seen Gordon lately? How's it going on his end?" "Not very smoothly. I think if I can find Miss Christine and have her as a witness to accuse these people of trying to frame Jonathan, then maybe Jonathan can end up in prison. Have you ever considered that Jonathan going to prison doesn't necessarily have to be Gotham prison? Do you want me to build a private prison? Schiller remained silent, merely rising to his feet and stating, "Are you planning to follow this kind of procedure for every criminal you capture from now on? Or perhaps, do you find it intriguing to tangle with them in these unjust judicial processes?" With this time, not only the Morrison district, but also the gangs from the surrounding 2 or 3 blocks could be handled. What Batman should do exactly, you know better than I do, Bruce. Bruce left, burdened with his own thoughts once more. Schiller had another issue to deal with. If Jonathan ended up in prison, regardless of which one, the source of the fear gas would become unstable. He had a limited supply on hand, and without the formula or the ability to create it, this powerful weapon would vanish forever, which would be a great loss. Schiller was more cunning than the current Batman, who was always in a hurry. He knew that the best course of action was not to force Jonathan to reveal the formula for the fear gas or to break him out of prison and control him to work for him. That would be both troublesome and dangerous. What he needed to do was find a new buyer for Jonathan, someone who could extract the formula from him, control him, and let Schiller continue to profit from the stolen fear gas. Those people wouldn't use the fear gas for anything good, so as long as they didn't get their hands on it, everything would be fine. It was a win-win situation. You produce on one end, I steal on the other. How much you produce, how much I steal. With the sharp weapon that is gray mist, could you even catch me? Schiller suspected that Jonathan was still too naive. He probably had already given away the formula for the fear gas. Once those people got the formula, they would have ways to manufacture it. Schiller knew that if they wanted to do something big, they would need a large-scale production line for the fear gas, not just for small-scale fights. To produce this poisonous gas on a large scale, they would need a factory assembly line. There were many chemical factories in Gotham, but most of them were not very professional. To have a high-end chemical production line, there was only one place, Wayne Chemical Factory. No matter how hard this group of people tried to cover up and operate, they couldn't avoid using Wayne Chemical Factory's production line. With the gray mist ability, Schiller could move around more freely at night. As he expected, it was another rainy night when Schiller, standing outside the Wayne Chemical Factory's railing, saw a car with a license plate ending in 676 enter the factory. In the days that followed, trucks constantly shuttled between Wayne Chemical Factory and another destination. It seemed they were transporting some large equipment. Schiller had no intention of stopping them. Instead, he tracked the trucks to find out where they were taking the stolen production line equipment. Unsurprisingly, it was in the eastern part of Gotham, the territory of the Red Crow Gang. There was another chemical factory there, though not as large as Wayne Chemical Factory. The stolen production line equipment from Wayne Chemical Factory had all been transported to this smaller chemical factory. However, things didn't go as planned. Once the production line started operating, problems emerged. First, they were missing several machines, as Wayne Chemical Factory's production line wasn't designed for making fear gas, and they needed to purchase some machines. Second, the chemists they had recruited didn't seem to be as skilled as Jonathan. The experiments before production went very poorly, and the fear gas they replicated didn't have the same potency as Jonathan's, let alone the same level of concentration. So, all the problems circled back to the issue of getting Jonathan out. Despite Jonathan being a scarecrow criminal with little experience, his expertise was formidable. The Red Crow Gang couldn't just abandon him, they had to figure out a way to exonerate him. Schiller hadn't anticipated the gang's incompetence. They had the formula, but they couldn't produce the gas. He had even considered intercepting the production line at its delivery point and just taking it all. Schiller's zero-cost plan had failed, but he wasn't giving up. Since the Red Crow Gang couldn't handle it, he needed to find a more capable buyer for Jonathan, someone like Sal Maroni. Episode 27, Gang Conspiracy. Maroni's gang family also resided in Gotham's East District, where the gang activity was much more rampant compared to the West District where Gotham University was located. In simple terms, because it was the most economically underdeveloped area of Gotham, the slums of the West District seemed like a haven of simplicity in comparison. The internal strife within the gangs in the East District was severe. As mentioned earlier, even a small gang like the Waterway Gang, consisting of just 100 or so members, aimed to control a nightclub, an almost impossible feat. The Maroni gang family owned a restaurant, 2 bars, a dance hall, and a strip club, making them one of the largest gangs in the area. The feud between the Maroni family and the Red Raven gang had deep roots. Their territories bordered each other, and frequent shootouts occurred at a bar in that shared territory. Both sides sought to control this vital crossroads, but neither had succeeded. That particular bar had become a lawless zone in the entire East District and the fastest source of information. For Sal, to establish himself in Gotham, especially in the dangerous and chaotic East District, he had to possess considerable skills. The Red Raven gang's theft of production lines did not escape his notice. In the underground of a bar controlled by the Maroni family, Sal lit a cigar and told his subordinates, "I've learned from our old friend, Police Station Chief Victor, that the red-headed kid from across the street seems to be planning some mischief." His subordinate replied, "Yes, it seems they've stolen a lot of large machinery from the south or southwest. I heard from a guy who lost in gambling that their boss seems to be interested in producing a certain chemical said to have mind-controlling effects." Sal squinted his eyes and said, "A few days ago, I had dinner with Victor, and he mentioned a case involving a chemical professor, possibly from Gotham University, who's quite skilled. Could this be related?" His subordinate said, "I have 2 informants close to that red-headed guy's mistress. He's been having a hot affair with her lately, and I might be able to extract some information from her." Sal flicked his lighter in thought and said, "If they have an extra piece of meat, we'll have to settle for less. But now it seems they not only want to share, but also want to swallow us whole. Let's see who's more capable." Maroni's speculation was spot on, and he effortlessly obtained the entire action plan of the Red Raven gang. Although the Red Raven gang's leader was clever, he was relatively young, and Maroni had him figured out. Meanwhile, Schiller played a crucial role in acquiring the formula for the fear gas from the Red Raven gang. He discreetly had Maroni's informants find it. The fact that Sal had connections with Police Station Chief Victor indicated his experience and extensive network compared to the Red Raven gang's leader. Soon, he found a reliable chemist who could analyze the formula, concluding that it was a large-scale biochemical weapon with potent effects. After this revelation, Maroni couldn't allow the Red Raven gang's operation to succeed. If they got their hands on this important weapon, the Maroni family would be in jeopardy. The first step was to ensure that the Red Raven gang couldn't secure Jonathan's release through their informant within the police station. On another dark evening, Gordon left work as usual. His immediate superior, Lantolos, had taken a dislike to him and didn't assign him any meaningful tasks. Gordon was almost becoming a secretary at the police station, with even his patrol duties given to others. Thus, he left work early, and as he walked out, he saw his superior turning a corner. Moments later, a speeding car collided with him, sending Lantolos flying over 10 meters from the police station entrance. Gordon rushed back into the police station to call for help, but before the ambulance arrived, Lantolos had already stopped breathing. Lantolos had been a cautious old cop, but lately, the Red Raven gang had offered him too many incentives to release Jonathan, fueling his insatiable greed. He had even considered marrying the sister of the Red Raven gang's leader, becoming overly eager and oblivious to the fact that their rivals were now targeting him. It all happened so quickly, and Gordon found himself in his superior's position without even realizing it. Of course, Maroni had orchestrated this masterfully. To hinder his opponents, he chose someone they disliked the most, and the conflict between Gordon and Lantolos had been evident to nearly all the police officers in the entire station. Maroni naturally selected Gordon. However, obstructing his adversaries was just the first step for Maroni. He also intended to produce this crucial weapon. He took a bolder approach than the Red Raven gang, bribing Wayne Chemical Factory's managers and using a production line for nitric acid preparations to secretly manufacture the gas. He even considered leaving the production line in place and covertly producing the gas at Wayne Chemical Factory. But there was still an issue. Producing fear gas on a large scale required large-scale separation equipment and other high-end devices. While Maroni had more money than the Red Raven gang, he was unsure about making such a massive investment. So, he turned to the chemist and had him manually replicate a small amount of fear gas. The person Maroni hired was much more skilled than anyone the Red Raven gang had, and although he couldn't fully reproduce the fear gas, he could achieve up to 80% accuracy, even though it couldn't be concentrated. Nevertheless, the results were highly effective. Maroni, upon seeing the effectiveness of this new venture, entertained the idea of investing heavily in it. After all, with a mere spray bottle, one could drive their opponents insane. Who in the entire East District would remain his rival once he secured it? Seizing control of the East District would render the tens of millions of dollars in revenue a trivial matter. As a result, Maroni urgently procured the necessary equipment from other states, spending millions of dollars and calling in numerous favors. He also hired a team of chemists at high salaries to work for him. Such a large-scale production operation couldn't be conducted at Wayne Chemical Factory. Since Maroni didn't own any chemical plants, he launched a shootout, resulting in the deaths of over 30 skilled individuals, to take control of a small chemical factory within the Red Crow gang's territory. Meanwhile, Bruce finally realized that his chemical factory had been stolen. He put two and two together, realizing that the gang had started manufacturing this poison gas. Simultaneously, Gordon received an anonymous tip claiming that a vehicle with license plate number 676 was frequently circling near Wayne Chemical Factory. Gordon and Bruce quickly joined forces once again as Batman and the detective, tracking down the vehicle and capturing members of the Red Crow gang. In one night, Batman dismantled the Red Crow gang, even though they were more formidable than the Sewer Rats gang with hundreds of members. However, they lacked formidable criminals and were merely ordinary gang members. With Batman leading the charge and Gordon making arrests, more than 200 individuals were apprehended in a single night. The leader of the Red Crow gang was on the brink of despair. Although they had stolen the production line from Wayne Chemical Factory, they hadn't produced any fear gas. Both the production line and the chemical factory were taken by Maroni's gang. Frustrated, the leader of the Red Crow gang pointed fingers at Sal Maroni during the arrest, leading Batman to shift his focus toward Maroni. However, Maroni was far more cunning and cautious than the leader of the Red Crow gang. The entire chemical factory was heavily guarded, and all members were on edge. Batman couldn't find a suitable opportunity at the moment. Maroni realized he was being watched and sought help from his protective umbrella, Police Station Chief Victor. Victor first internally dismissed the case of the Wayne Chemical Factory theft, intending to sweep it under the rug. Then, under Maroni's instructions, he continued to interfere with Jonathan's trial, attempting to clear him of charges so he could work at Maroni's chemical factory. Schiller added fuel to this already tense situation of multiple standoffs. He guided Police Station Chief Victor to obtain a concentrated fear gas solution that Jonathan had developed. Once Maroni had this concentrated solution, he understood Jonathan's importance even better, pressuring Victor relentlessly to expedite Jonathan's release. Before Victor could make a move, someone approached him. As Batman had anticipated, it was the president of Gotham University. Although Victor was the police station chief, his ties to Gotham's political scene were not strong. On the contrary, the president of Gotham University had connections with numerous jury members and state legislators. Previously, he had been bought by the Red Crow gang, a fact known to all. Now that the Red Crow gang had fallen, the president of Gotham University needed a new protector. Without the shelter of a major gang in Gotham, one could hardly move a step. Naturally, the president of Gotham University didn't mind switching allegiance to Maroni's gang. Upon learning that they were also interested in the fear gas, he confided in Victor. "That girl isn't very cautious, she's been boasting everywhere that she will become Bruce Wayne's date. I took advantage of her visit to my office and kidnapped her. If we can exert influence on Wayne family's heir, with his power, helping Jonathan escape conviction will be a breeze." "Just with a woman?" Victor asked. But young Wayne isn't naive. Though he indulges in the nightlife, having him willingly work for us just as a date? How can we make that happen? "We don't necessarily need his willing cooperation," the president said. "You want to kidnap young Wayne?" "No, the risk is too great," Victor protested. "We might not be able to control him." The Wayne family held a significant portion of Gotham's economy, and attempting anything against Bruce carried the potential for terrifying consequences if it failed. The president said, "In fact, I've already devised a plan. We can kidnap young Wayne but don't necessarily have to control him. We can also find a replacement." Episode 28, The antagonist is utterly clueless. Victor and the president of Gotham University pondered how to deal with Bruce, but Batman was equally contemplating how to handle them. After days of self-reflection, Batman had sorted out many things. For instance, Schiller had posed every question to him, and he had found answers to all of them. Now, he acknowledged that he was not like the police. He wasn't an embodiment of absolute justice. In fact, he was no different from those criminals, as neither of them adhered to the law. Batman had firmly resolved to uphold his own brand of justice, disregarding the conventional judicial system. So, his methods in investigating Christine's disappearance were no longer awkward or reckless. Once Batman had clarity, his intellect and execution were unmatched. He began by targeting the president of Gotham University. Compared to Victor, a seasoned cop who had spent years in the field, the president, while cautious, lacked formal police training. Physically, he was just an ordinary man and easier to deal with. One night, Batman stealthily infiltrated the president's home. Although he didn't find the exact location where Christine was held captive, he did discover some inconspicuous call records on the president's landline phone. He speculated that the president himself wasn't the one behind Christine's abduction. He likely had accomplices or subordinates. Contacting them through the landline was the safest option, as not just anyone could access the call records of such an old-fashioned phone, making it nearly impossible to trace past dialed numbers. Bruce had resumed his student identity and paid a visit to the president's office. He had a legitimate reason. He had submitted an assignment, but Schiller had unfairly marked it down. Bruce intended to file a complaint with the president. During his conversation with the president, Batman used specialized equipment to capture the president's voice samples. He then used a voice modulator to dial the unknown number. Batman's words were skillful. He didn't ask any direct questions, but rather ambiguously inquired, "How is the person now?" The person on the other end didn't seem cautious. Without hesitation, they replied, "Sir, as per your request, we haven't harmed her. However, she's such a beautiful girl, my men are finding it hard to control themselves. If anything happens to her, you'll regret it," Batman warned. Of course. We'll keep them in check." As soon as the person on the other end spoke, Batman knew they were just a group of gang members. Batman was well acquainted with the gangs of Gotham, they all had a similar style. Having traced their location, Batman, though lacking perfect equipment, had access to the numerous Wayne family satellites in the sky. Tracking a mobile phone signal was a trivial task. Upon locating their hideout, Batman found that Christine was indeed not in immediate danger. The president's intention wasn't to harm her to threaten Wayne but to make her an informant. Naturally, they couldn't harm her, or how could she continue to date Bruce? Batman rescued Christine, who, while physically unharmed, was greatly traumatized emotionally. After taking her to the hospital, Christine expressed her willingness to testify against the president for kidnapping her. On the other side, Victor faced difficulties too. In front of Victor, an old pro, Gordon, the straightforward advocate for justice, was the hardest to deal with. After all, Victor couldn't simply shout in the police station that Gordon's approach to justice was wrong. He had to maintain an appearance of righteousness. Gordon knew what kind of person Victor was but had to play along, delaying his time so that he wouldn't have the opportunity to help Jonathan destroy evidence or tamper with files. Gordon scrutinized everything related to Jonathan, the case being one he had cracked. Victor couldn't guarantee that even after he destroyed the evidence in the police station, Gordon hadn't kept a backup. This rookie, despite being impulsive and difficult, indeed had some skills. As for Maroni, he was even more unfortunate. To increase Maroni's sunk costs, Schiller frequently sabotaged the chemical factory. He didn't do anything significant. Today, he would remove a couple of parts from the machines, and tomorrow, he would clog the drainage pipes. These minor issues would be seen as accidental, but they caused significant delays. Some of the machine parts could only be purchased from the original manufacturers, and Maroni had to exert considerable effort to obtain them. Some parts weren't even available from the manufacturers, and he had to pay a hefty price to acquire them from others. All these issues led to Maroni spending nearly $1 million without any significant results. Maroni believed that all these problems arose because Jonathan was taking too long to get released. He thought the workers were unprofessional, and only Jonathan could handle it. So, he pressured Victor. With Victor feeling the heat, he had to approach the president again. However, the president realized that Christine, whom he had kidnapped, had disappeared. Their plan had not even begun, and it was already a failure. Unfortunately, Victor was desperate to carry out the plan. With both the police station head and the president facing immense pressure due to the disappearance of their key player, they had no choice but to take a huge risk and directly kidnap Bruce. On the day when Schiller accepted Bruce's invitation to dine at Wayne Manor, Bruce finished his class and went straight to find Schiller. Together, they got into a car, planning to head back to Wayne Manor directly. Gotham University was still a considerable distance away from Wayne Manor, although not as far as the East District on the diagonal axis. It would still take at least half an hour by car. If there was one advantage to Gotham, it was that it wasn't as congested as New York. The roads in this place were straight as an arrow and wide, allowing for carefree acceleration. To demonstrate his sincerity, Bruce didn't have a driver pick them up, he drove himself. Perhaps with a subtle hint of showing off, he wasn't driving a bulky security vehicle but a beautiful Lamborghini in bright blue, exuding an air of extravagance. Just as Bruce was pushing the speedometer to 140 miles per hour, a group of masked individuals suddenly emerged from a corner, their gun barrels pointed at the car. Bruce's immediate reaction was to swerve the steering wheel. He wasn't afraid, but the professor sitting in the passenger seat hadn't undergone any training. He shouted, "Professor, get down." Schiller, unruffled, said, "I'm quite certain that the car your butler ordered for you comes equipped with bulletproof glass and tires." Then he added, "If you want to find out who's behind this attack, you could pretend the vehicle lost control, knock yourself out, and perhaps gain some clues later." Bruce could tell that these individuals were likely after him for a kidnapping, or else they wouldn't be firing all their bullets at the car's undercarriage. Bruce hesitated. If he were alone, he would definitely go through with it, but he regarded Schiller as an ordinary person. If he were kidnapped, the captors might not hesitate, but it might be different for Schiller. Schiller said, "I believe you don't need to worry about me. I won't joke with my own life." In the end, Bruce stopped the car. He forcefully turned the steering wheel, causing the car to spin a few times on the road before the rear end collided with a lamppost, as if the brakes had failed. Then he slumped his head onto the steering wheel, and Schiller also pretended to faint. The kidnappers, demonstrating a modicum of restraint, didn't immediately resort to violence upon seeing that there was more than just Bruce in the car. Instead, they proceeded to abduct both Bruce and Schiller, securing them with hoods and handcuffs. After a while, the car arrived at what seemed to be a slum area. Bruce and Schiller were brought into a room. Their hoods were removed, and both Schiller and Bruce pretended to display shocked expressions. However, Schiller was genuinely taken aback when the school principal walked in. He hadn't anticipated that the mastermind would dare to stroll in so boldly, without a mask, even wearing his work suit. Schiller was truly speechless. Even if you didn't know that Bruce was Batman, you had successfully covered up 99 steps of your wrongdoing. All that was left was to not tremble like this? If someone were to pick Bruce up right now and shake him, they might discover miniature cameras hidden all over his body, proving he had let his guard down. Of course, just like in the movies, this portly school principal began to boast about his wicked plan. He claimed to have prepared a stand-in for Bruce long ago. After kidnapping Bruce, he could immediately replace him. He had also intended to achieve Christine's kidnapping through Bruce's abduction, but he hadn't expected Bruce to be so vulnerable and that just a few gunmen would suffice. After his lengthy monologue, he confessed to all his crimes. In short, after committing every mistake that movie villains could make, Schiller had lost his patience with him. He directly said, "Bruce, go for it." Bruce leaped up immediately, and the handcuffs posed no challenge. The principal was standing too close, and within seconds, Bruce had him pinned down, handcuffing him with his own restraints. Gunmen waiting outside rushed in but were subdued one by Bruce. When Gordon arrived, the principal tried to rely on Victor to overpower him, but Gordon said, "Sorry, but the commissioner was arrested just last night while trying to destroy evidence in the archive room secretly." Although he tampered with the surveillance cameras, Harvey used the pretext of tidying up to install another camera there. "The evidence is irrefutable, pal," Bruce said. "Looks like they've run out of options. Now we have one more person to deal with." Schiller pulled out a dossier from his briefcase and said, "Just as we planned earlier, I managed to obtain detailed maps and personnel records for that chemical factory. I think it's time for a certain caped crusader to spring into action." Episode 29, The Bloodied Gang Leader. It has been proven that the initial villains in any story are often ridiculously foolish, such as the current headmaster of Gotham University and the police station chief, Victor. They wouldn't have even garnered a second glance had it not been for the fledgling Batman of today. If it were the heyday of the old masters, they wouldn't have merited a moment's consideration. Fortunately, Maroni, the antagonist introduced in the middle of the story, proved to be a formidable adversary. Even before Batman could raid his hideout, the production line for fear gas was already in full swing, churning out copious amounts. Schiller did not immediately target this batch of fear gas, as he knew that seizing it prematurely would only heighten their vigilance. Although a substantial amount of fear gas was being produced, it was temporarily stored in warehouses. Maroni understood that this type of biochemical weapon had to be used in large quantities, ideally enveloping an entire city block, to maximize its effectiveness. Unfortunately for him, this played right into Schiller's hands. When the 3 warehouses at the small chemical plant were nearly brimming with fear gas, Schiller activated gray mist. In a matter of moments, he flew into the warehouses and consumed all the fear gas concentrate. Schiller dared to take this risk because gray mist had assured him that as a symbiote, it could consume and store the fear gas without any issues. However, Schiller remained skeptical. It was akin to a heavy drinker claiming that storing alcohol with them would be trouble-free. Thankfully, the symbiote was relatively obedient. After dispersing into gray mist, it promptly devoured all the fear gas in the warehouse without getting intoxicated. The bottles containing the fear gas showed no signs of change. The symbiote factors infiltrated the molecular structure of the bottles, leaving no trace of the fear gas. The following day, when Maroney came to inspect the warehouse, he was left dumbfounded. The boxes and bottles were neatly arranged, and there was no evidence of anyone entering or exiting the warehouse. Yet, the fear gas had vanished. Maroney knew the catastrophic consequences if this bioweapon were discovered by certain individuals. Although the chemical plant was relatively small, its security was stringent, especially in the warehouses storing a substantial quantity of fear gas. It was practically impenetrable. However, one couldn't expect security guards in the dead of night to be vigilant against a sudden waft of mist. Maroney was thoroughly defeated in this regard. He had invested millions of dollars, countless hours, and incurred numerous debts. The results of his extensive efforts had been stolen from right under his nose. If this failure had occurred at the beginning, it might have been somewhat acceptable. But now, he had invested a significant amount of manpower and resources. He had installed new equipment costing millions of dollars, hired high-paid chemists, and even had a shootout with the Red Crow gang, resulting in the deaths of dozens of skilled individuals. All the funeral expenses had been covered. And now, you tell me that the finished product had been stolen? Anyone in his shoes would be spitting blood. What's even more crucial is that Maroney was aware that the police and some peculiar Batman had their sights set on him. In order to deal with these threats, he had mobilized several informants who had never been activated before. His intelligence network had been thoroughly exposed, leading to the deaths of many informants. His decades of hard work had led to the downfall of a significant portion of his information network. Just when Maroney was contemplating increasing his investment to produce another batch of fear gas due to sunk costs, he visited the production line again, only to find that all the equipment, bottles, and jars had been turned into dust. Maroney's heartbreak was audible throughout all of Gotham. The symbiote's capabilities greatly surprised Schiller. The symbiote explained that it could break down not only fear gas but also other objects, as long as they had a molecular structure. It could disassemble them and incorporate them into its symbiotic factors, storing them for future use and reassembling them into complete objects when necessary. This effectively meant that Schiller had a portable storage space where he could store most common items, whether they were made of metal, plastic, or fibers. The symbiote could effortlessly consume and store them, and when needed, restore them to their original state. Schiller pondered that while low-level criminals either harmed others while causing chaos or harmed others while seeking personal gain, he was different. His greatest skill lay in profiting immensely for himself while also doing some good. Who would want to be a bad guy when you could be a hero? In Schiller's view, those who only sought to harm others for personal gain were simply lacking in intelligence. Since he could choose to gain fame and fortune without bearing any moral burden, why not do it this way? What he had accomplished this time not only obliterated the Red Crow gang but also caused significant losses to the Maroney family. It also shattered the trust relationship between the gangs, the police, and Gotham City Hall. Their first ever close cooperation ended in such a disastrous manner. Even Sal, as foolish as he might be, was unlikely to cooperate with these politicians and the police again. Moreover, considering the current circumstances, the heavily damaged Sal had no intention of letting these people off the hook. Unable to identify the thieves, he could easily squeeze more out of Victor. Before Victor could even face trial, he disappeared, and nobody knew where he had gone. Maroney now had no time to concern himself with Gordon's position, so Gordon naturally became the leader of the Gotham City Police Department's Field Operations Task Force and gained real power for the first time. The president of Gotham University, who had been involved in this matter, also ran into trouble because Batman didn't have a private prison yet. After obtaining the evidence, he tossed the unconscious president back into his office. However, on that fateful night, he was struck by a truck. Despite being saved at the hospital, he was left with a lifelong disability. His aspirations of climbing the ranks seemed unlikely to be realized. The situation in the East District gang grew even more complex. The Red Crow gang had been wiped out, breaking the stalemate between the two sides. However, the Maroney family no longer had the power to dominate the East District. Several small-scale gangs joined forces, attempting to take a piece of the pie from the Maroney family. Maroney, of course, wouldn't allow his family's interests to be devoured. In no time, the entire East District became a battleground for gangs. After a bloody skirmish where both sides suffered losses, the Maroney family had no choice but to reach an agreement with the emerging gang families. They would temporarily refrain from hostilities. However, this was a significant loss for the Maroney family, and some of the smaller gangs in their territory started to defy their authority. Jonathan was ultimately not thrown into prison because he did indeed have a mental illness. This wasn't a result of anyone trying to clear his name, but rather an authoritative conclusion reached by the psychiatrists at Arkham Asylum. Whether Jonathan ended up in Gotham Prison or Arkham Asylum didn't matter, as he wasn't yet the Scarecrow and lacked the ability to escape from either place. Furthermore, the Wayne family exposed the pest that was the owner of Wayne Chemical Factory. Batman gained some notoriety in Gotham for the first time. Miss Christine was saved without suffering substantial injuries, and Schiller obtained a large amount of fear gas as weapons. Only the world of gangs and criminals was wounded. Although neither the Gotham University president nor Commissioner Victor, nor Maroni could be considered great leaders in the Batman world script, at most, they were just a few cannon fodder characters at the beginning of the story. So, they all appeared somewhat foolish to varying degrees. However, Schiller knew that the curtains of the Batman world had not yet been drawn, and the truly dangerous and insane criminals had not yet taken the stage. It was just with his intervention that Batman would grow faster. Perhaps when facing his old adversaries, he would gain a greater advantage. With hopes for the DC world, Schiller once again sank into dreamland. When he woke up, he was back in the bustling streets of New York. Unfortunately, the first person he met that morning was the one he least wanted to see. "Please have a seat, Miss Natasha. I won't bother with pleasantries," he said. On the other side, Natasha was dressed casually, looking more like a housewife who had gone for a morning jog than a female agent. She had applied light makeup, appearing to be in good health. Her hair was not tied back, but rather styled up, making her look nothing like Black Widow. However, this seemed more logical. After all, showing up in Hell's Kitchen in a tight black leather outfit with guns and various tools strapped to her waist would only attract various threats, possibly even rocket launchers. Natasha took a sip of her coffee and said, "Mr. Schiller, first, I want to apologize on behalf of Coulson. Our initial contact with you was purely because you were Stark's psychological counselor, and we wanted to gather more information about Stark's mental issues. You understand the impact it would have if a conglomerate like Stark Industries were to collapse. But now, we're here to seek your help because we truly can't find a better psychologist than you." One had to admit that this female agent was quite versatile. Dressed casually, sipping coffee at the table, and with her beautiful face, it was hard to feel any animosity toward her. It seemed that Black Widow was not just intimidating, she was indeed an outstanding agent who could adapt her style according to the situation. Schiller replied, "You don't need to beat around the bush. I'm well aware of why I left Presbyterian Hospital. But you didn't find anything useful there, did you? The only thing at Presbyterian Hospital that interested you is of no use to you. I was there solely for my research. However, you decided to terminate me based on baseless speculation. We should settle this score. We don't have information about the personnel decisions at Presbyterian Hospital, but we do have a better job offer here," Natasha said. She then pulled out a set of documents from her bag and handed them to Schiller. Natasha continued, "We officially invite you, Mr. Schiller Rodriguez, to become a senior psychological counselor, specially invited by the Bureau of Land Strategic Defense and Logistics Support. You will provide psychological counseling services to one or more specific bureau members." Schiller hesitated, saying, "I don't. Just like your discussions with Mr. Stark, the compensation is $1 million per hour. Thank you. Let's cooperate," Schiller smiled and shook hands with Natasha. Episode 30, Roger's Worry. Compared to Gotham, New York didn't experience rain very often, and the weather here was generally clear. However, there were a few exceptions throughout the year. On this particular day, the rain began to fall lightly over New York's skyline even before dawn. For the residents of Hell's Kitchen, this wasn't good news. Being Manhattan's largest slum, they didn't enjoy many civic amenities. Without diligent street sweepers, the rain would only turn the streets muddier. If you didn't want your sneakers ruined, you had to wear heavy rain boots. The odors of trash and dust became more pronounced in such weather. Schiller closed the windows on the ground floor since a few drunkards often vomited on his back street, and the smell was unbearable. Suddenly, the doorbell rang crisply. Schiller glanced at his watch. It was 6:30 in the morning, an unusually early hour even for the fast-paced New York. Schiller descended the stairs and found a tall, blonde, blue-eyed man staring at the calendar on his counter. Schiller said, "It looks like Natasha has indeed arranged for someone extraordinary to meet me. It's quite rare these days to find someone up and about before 7 a.m. The man replied, "So I'm lucky to have found a fellow early riser here." Schiller produced the dossier Natasha had sent him the previous night. He looked at the photo on the dossier and then scrutinized the man before him. He said, Steve Rogers, SHIELD, has scheduled an unlimited appointment for you. They must have been quite generous, indicating that your problem is quite serious. Steve shrugged and said, they seem to think everything is serious, including me running out without breakfast. Schiller tapped the table, inviting him to sit down, and said, well, your decision was correct. Maybe SHIELD didn't tell you that if you happen to come at mealtime, I don't mind treating you to a meal. Steve smiled. His handsome face exuded charm and cheerfulness. Schiller prepared an American breakfast: toast, fried bacon, 2 sausages, 2 large hash browns, and 2 cups of coffee. Steve wasn't actually hungry, but the aroma of breakfast was simply irresistible. He picked up a piece of toast and asked, do you have any butter? Schiller looked at him somewhat surprised and said, oh, I only have strawberry jam. Then he assessed Steve once more and remarked, you seem to be a bit old-fashioned. Not many people these days put butter on their bread. Steve replied, no relationship, I'm just not used to eating such sweet jam for breakfast. In that case, let me get you some homemade sauce. Schiller fetched a jar and handed it to Steve. Steve glanced at the coffee cup, which was barely larger than a bottle cap, and the strong espresso inside. He asked, I'm sorry, but could I have a cup of American coffee instead? American coffee? You could have just asked for a cup of tap water, Schiller quipped. On the other side, Natasha, who was listening in, spoke into her intercom, the surveillance subject refers to American coffee as dirty water. Suspect's possible Italian heritage. Steve wasn't offended, he simply waved his hand and said, hey, don't say that. I just think espresso isn't great for the heart. Before his words could settle, Schiller had already downed 2 shots of espresso and taken a big bite of chocolate. His symbiote sang joyfully in his head. Schiller sat across from Steve, and they began to have breakfast together. When Nick first told me to find a psychologist in the slums by myself, I didn't understand why. Doesn't SHIELD have good enough doctors? Steve remarked. But now, being here, I realize the atmosphere in this place is much better than SHIELD's overly pristine counseling rooms, he added. Compared to the counseling rooms, it feels more like a courtroom there. Who could judge you? Schiller asked. Judge Captain America? Steve chuckled in resignation and said, those days are long gone, including my own beliefs. I suppose SHIELD must really want you to go to their own counseling rooms, but I suspect even they know they can't handle your issues. Schiller set down his fork and said, did you walk here from the streets outside? How do you find it here? I mean, this slum. Steve pursed his lips and replied, I don't know how to describe it. It's terrifying here, because nothing has changed. In my time, slums were like this too, with dirty, smelly drains filled with vomit from drunkards. Dead drunkards leaning against building corners, kids rifling through their pockets, never learning better. Many years have passed, but it's still the same, no change at all. Schiller took a bite of bread and asked, what kind of change do you think should have occurred over the past few decades? Steve spread his hands and said, even if we can't eradicate slums, they should have become smaller, or people's lives should have improved. Shaking his head, Schiller said, you won the war, Captain America. You definitely won against those. We emerged victorious, and the just war ended many years ago. You would expect victory to bring many benefits, like a more prosperous society and better lives for people. You fought until the last moment for those who had suffered so much. Schiller gently shook his head and said, decades later, when you wake up again, you find that this world is not as you once envisioned it. It hasn't turned black, nor has it turned white, it has turned gray, a color you can't comprehend. Steve pursed his lips, appearing somewhat contemplative. Schiller said, I know your issues are not as simple as SHIELD believes them to be. It's not just about having been dormant for too long, or feeling disconnected from society. It's not about being unable to use a mobile phone, enjoying listening to broadcasts, or having a regular schedule. For Captain America, as long as he wants to learn, there's nothing from the modern world he can't grasp. And if he doesn't learn, it's likely because he doesn't want to. You're resisting this era, unwilling to accept it, and unwilling to accept that the results of your hard-fought battles haven't turned out as gloriously as you hoped. Steve replied with a touch of bitterness, I've given it my all, and even if the results aren't ideal, I'm trying to accept it. But what pains me the most is that during war, if people were suffering, I could identify my enemies and strike them down, no matter the cost. But now, when people are suffering, I don't even know who the adversary is. Perhaps you haven't considered that your era has passed, and with it, your responsibility for the people. You don't need to be a war machine anymore. Steve asked, then what should I do? I should still do something, right? Schiller replied, Captain America, you are so compassionate that even if I suggested pursuing your hobbies, like drawing comics or engaging in sports, you wouldn't abandon these people's suffering to solely enjoy yourself. You're not that kind of person, and I won't offer you such useless advice. I believe S.H.I.E.L.D. psychologists have told you the same, haven't they? Is there anyone in this world who doesn't know how to enjoy life? They genuinely think that if they were in your shoes, they'd fly off to Hawaii for a vacation, with S.H.I.E.L.D. picking up the tab. Ordinary people can't understand your excess of sympathy and sense of responsibility. You certainly don't need to worry about their lack of understanding. Steve nodded in agreement. He felt like someone finally understood him and said with a hint of complaint, they think I have plenty to do, like working out, watching movies, or playing video games, but that's not what I'm supposed to do. When I show resistance, they think I'm just outdated and incapable of enjoying these things. But maybe you can change your perspective and stop seeking understanding from ordinary people. The world is vast, and you may not be the hero of this era, but there are heroes in every era. You can seek out those who have, like you, once saved the world or are currently doing so. They will understand you. Schiller continued, moreover, the heroes of this era also face challenges. They don't have your longevity or experience. They may possess power but lack the skills, or they may be scattered and lack unity. You can find these people. Your era has passed, but Earth keeps turning, and there are still those fighting to save the world, isn't there? Steve sighed, saying, I'm just an outdated soldier who refuses to retire. You're right, Doctor, it's time for the new recruits to take the field. But I have some doubts. Can I really be of help? It seems like the rules governing this world are completely different from wartime. I do have someone I must recommend to you, though. He's a lucky kid with a story much like yours. Originally, he was just a nerdy schoolboy who got bullied. Then, one day, he gained tremendous power and started leaping around the city, not doing anything productive. You know how dangerous it can be when someone suddenly gains immense power. To put it bluntly, his power is still growing, and he might outmatch dozens of well-trained special forces soldiers. Steve became restless and asked, Indeed, I've just completed my transformation, and I can't control my strength yet. I even accidentally injured 2 medical personnel. Where is he now? Which hospital is he in? He's still in school, actually. He's about to take his final exams, currently studying. My goodness, why is he still in school? Steve banged his fist on the table in frustration, then addressed the listening device on the table, saying, Hey, Nick, what's going on? How can you let a modified soldier stay in school? What if he can't control his power and hurts people? Steve stood up, and Schiller gestured for him to calm down, saying, I told you, he's a lucky kid. Unlike you, he's not a product of pharmaceutical modifications, but rather a unique mutation. His power will gradually increase, not suddenly become uncontrollable. What I mean is, these teenagers, you know, full of themselves and sensitive, impulsive yet timid. They need someone to guide them, preferably someone who can show them the harsh realities of society. Steve clenched his fist and said, Indeed, I've seen plenty of young recruits like that. They charge into the battlefield fueled by nothing but hot blood, but when they see bombings and grenades, they scream in fear. They have a long way to go. Schiller added, I expect he'll finish his exams tomorrow night and likely start roaming around. You can intercept him and give him a good lesson. Don't worry, his mutation ability is quite robust. A little beating won't hurt him. Steve even looked eager. It reminded him of his days on the battlefield when he would discipline young recruits, and seeing them struggle was one of the few moments in his military career that brought him ease and joy.